G'day to you. It's Joel and Luke here with For King and Country.
Yes, and we are on the Nebula podcast. Have a listen.
What is up, everybody? Eddie Barco here once again. Welcome to the Nebula Music Podcast. You guys already know what this is. This is a cool show. We talk to some very cool musicians, pick their brain just for a little bit, and hopefully we can learn something new from them. Today, I am very excited because I have not one, but two amazing guests. It's a duo. It's Joe and Luke of King and Country joining me today on a very special episode. How are you two? You guys are in Montana, hanging out, drinking coffee. How's everything?
We're in Great Falls, Montana, Eddie Barco. We have this. We're traveling again after obviously a year or two of a year and a half of hiatus, and we have this sort of. You call it a bit of a habit. Every day, Daniel, who is our brother right here, is also our executive show designer. And he finds the most premier coffee shop. He's a bit of a snob when it comes to coffee.
Ooh.
Finds the most premier coffee shop, and here we are.
You both coffee fans?
I'm sticking a pinky in the air.
Luke and Joe, are you guys both coffee fans? Like huge coffee fans?
Well, it appears that it's becoming that way. I actually, my father-in-law has a coffee roasting business, and so he actually roasts coffee in our garage. And I've become. It's kind of like people with wine. It's like if you say you're a wine connoisseur, that's a deep rabbit hole, because then you can get into people like, well, how much of a connoisseur are you? So when you ask me, like, are you a coffee fan? I am, and I can tell you if I like it or I don't like it. But if you're going to get into, like, I can taste a black coffee and I can tell you the origin and what it's tasting like, I mean, I'm lost at that point. But we love it. It's funny. I think coffee becomes more of a cultural thing.
Yeah.
It's about the coffee of meeting with people and hanging. That's the part of coffee that I love. I love, welcoming people to my home and saying, hey, do you want some coffee? And I want it to be good, and so, that's when we get into kind of making sure we have good coffee. And it's funny. It kind of opens up a world of friendship.
That's so cool, because I feel like that culture of coffee, getting that in the coffee shop, that used to be, that's been around for a very long time, but then, kind of Starbucks took over and all of that. And now I feel like we're sort of venturing back away, going back to the tradition, like going to like different coffee shops and everything. I'm wondering, in your perspective right now, because you guys are traveling right now, do you see, like, in your travels right now, do you feel like there are a lot of people out and about, kind of going to coffee shops and stuff? Or do you still feel like everything's a little bit like down low, a little bit, everyone's still at home or whatever? Because we are still in a very like weird time. Things are open, but maybe not so much. What do you guys see?
United States is a funny place, man. We're originally from Australia, and obviously Australia's an island. They've handled it very differently. Our parents are down there right now. They're actually about to fly back. Actually, they would be flying back right now, wouldn't they?
Right now. Damn.
Yeah, I think they just landed back, but they had quarantine for 2 weeks. They had 3 different tests and the whole kit and caboodle when they got down there. Because there were 30 cases in Sydney. Like, there's more cases in Luke's rural county in Tennessee than in all of Sydney, Australia, and they shut the whole place down. So they're handling it very differently. But I think with like each state, it feels like you go to like one state to the next, and you just feel a little bit. Some states, we're kind of northwest. Montana. It's a little bit, we're sort of off the beaten path here. So there's a little bit of a more chill vibe. But you're right when you say it's very much in flux right now with a lot of people. I think the good news is there's just an opportunity for people to, enter at their own risk now. Like last year, there was so much unknown. There was no vaccine. It like, at this point, at least, it's like, hey, well, we've got options. So still very unique time for sure.
Yeah. Luke, I'm wondering for you, did you get stir crazy at all this past year? I asked this very lightly, but because, a lot of musicians that come on the show, everyone has had a different experience this past year. No one knew how to handle this. So it was bizarre. And I think it's interesting to really like understand how people handled it. Some people loved it, were very creative. Some people got very stir crazy and just needed to leave the house. I don't know. I kind of want to start with Luke. How did you feel when everything started halfway through and then now where we're at? Do you like just need to be out of the house or do you not care? Maybe you're okay. I don't know.
Yeah, it's kind of even similar to what Joel was saying about the cases. Like, look, if you're in New York City and the whole city's shut down and you're in a 100-foot square flat, I mean, you're probably going to get pretty dang stir crazy at that point. Where for us, I live kind of in the country, and thankfully, Tennessee. But I live in a little town called Columbia, Tennessee, and so it's kind of like a, it's got a GM plant there. It's got a lot of farming. So we're in a fairly, I want to say off the beaten path, but it's a little bit different. But we also have like a tiny little farm. So for us, us being locked down outside of like groceries, we didn't have a ton of need to go anywhere anyway. So it did become refreshing for us. I mean, it's the longest amount of time. And I say that tentatively because I know that, or gingerly, because I think everybody's dealt with different things. I mean, when you're losing someone or someone got really sick, I mean, it's a very different circumstances than me saying, hey, this was a little bit refreshing. Because it was refreshing, mostly because I was home. It's the longest amount of time I've been home since my wife and I got married. We got 4 kids now. And
Congrats.
So
big
thanks.
Family.
So
love it.
Yeah. I like that 4 kids is now a big family. I love that. So anyway, it was kind of, it did have a moment for us to pause. We didn't know when we were going to do shows again. And there was the kind of the idea of like, can we financially afford some of these things? But you know what? Like I think a lot of people experience, we got to survive it together. We got to have a little bit of an adventure all together. And there was something compelling about that. And it gave us something to write about, I think, as well. I'm not going to write songs about pandemics, but maybe the lessons that I've learned from it is something that we could maybe all write a little bit about.
Yeah. Were you two already writing music prior to the pandemic? Because I know you guys do a lot of music. You guys go on tour, put on an album, and it seems like you immediately just start writing new stuff almost right away. I'm wondering, were you already working on material and then, the world closed down? And did you have to rethink a lot of that material, or was it already maybe oddly accurate to what was happening? I don't know. But I know that you did put music out. So I'm curious how that process went like.
We had already sort of tentatively planned to do a Christmas record last year. Earlier in our time as musicians, probably 7-8 years ago, we did this sort of very on the nose version of The Little Drummer Boy, where we just added a load of drums to this Christmas classic, and it kind of went off like a house on fire. And so from that day to this, we've been very fond of, doing our own Christmas renditions. And so COVID actually, in some ways, right in the height of quarantine, we literally divided up into a studio, each of us isolated to separate rooms, and recorded a whole Christmas album, which was just really it was bizarre, obviously, but it was sort of magical to sing these songs about thank you so much. Coffee is here. Such great hope and celebration in a time where there were so many questions, So we wrote a little bit for that record, but for the most part, it was we put classics on that, and then it was beginning of this year was when we really felt the prompting, like, hey man, we got, we've experienced so much life, not in the last few years, but just in the last year with everything that the world has walked through. It's time to get back in the studio and write and record, and so we're just now starting to release, new music be on the beginning of that process. And I think, Eddie, speaking of writing and musicians and whatnot, I think you're gonna hear some of the best music that maybe you've ever heard in the next few years, because musicians have had nothing to do other than just sort of hunker down and be creative. And so we're excited to be part of that.
Musicians have had so much time to be contemplative and emo, and hopefully something out of that comes really powerful.
Right.
Yeah. What's a common theme that I saw a lot in, having these conversations over quarantine and everything. There was a lot of people that started to confront things that they never ever had to deal with because either they were on the road, they were in the studio all the time, whatever it may be. We're all busy. And then for the first time ever, maybe like 100 years, everybody was forced to be at home and be alone with themselves, with their thoughts and things of that nature. And you are absolutely right. I do feel like we're in store for a lot of really, really good music, but I also feel like it's going to be a lot of things that people don't expect. There's so many artists that are known for the like upbeat, super happy songs. And then over the pandemic, they realized, oh, maybe I want to talk about more of these emotions things. I guess my question for you two is, when it came to this new music that you guys started writing, did that resonate with you? Did you start thinking about things that you normally don't think about, and maybe that's what's going to come out in this new music? Or maybe you reinforce more of what you already thought about or felt like? I don't know, but does that make sense?
Oh, totally. It's funny that you say that, because I remember we had a song that we were kind of releasing through the pandemic. And I remember thinking, like, if you're to release like a club song right now, it just feels irresponsible almost. You know what I'm saying? Like, it just feels like you can't quite, nobody can even go to the club, And so I do think we released a song called Together at that time. And that song had been in the bag ish for, a couple of years. And I actually went to Joel when we're up in Canada when the border was closing. We were up there doing shows, ironically enough, on March 10th.
Were you stuck up there? Were you stuck up there for a little bit?
We weren't stuck, but we were meant to be doing 12 shows up in Canada, and we got 2 in. And in Toronto, the government said, hey, we're shutting the border, I think, in 72 hours. No more shows. Basically, it's time for you to go home. And but it was up there that I said, hey, the song that we've been playing live together, this is the time that we need to release this, because that song says, if we fall, we will fall together, and when we rise, we'll rise together. And it was like, man, that feels applicable in this pandemic season. And so, I think, look, I think that everybody had to counteract fear. That was the thing that I felt the most, just going to the grocery stores and raising kids, is there was just this. Nobody knew what to do with the fear. And I don't really care who you were. It was one of the rare times in the world. Like, we've gone through things like September 11th, where it was like, for the most part, this is an American thing. This happened in America. America was mourning, but the pandemic was worldwide. And we were mourning this worldwide. And I think as creatives, sometimes there is the moment where you write that super fun song for release. But I also think there's sometimes that you write that song that is deeply embedded in all the thoughts and the fears and the concerns that you've had, because it's in those songs that you write that the listener says, that's the way I felt. That's that's what I was going through. And that's what we all love about music, is it brings you together, it unifies you. And hopefully, I think Joel and I's goal is you can write some music that brings you together, but also then brings you together to then spur you on to go on out and impact your local community for the better. Impact your family for the better. And so, I do think that there's going to be a lot of people writing things that maybe were known for. They were known for writing the happy song, but they had to do something with that concern, that fear, that it will probably prompt some different music.
Yeah. And Joel, did you feel the same way too, though? Like, I know you guys are in this together, but I know sometimes when it comes with duos, sometimes the opinions can differ a little bit. And you two have been at this for a very long time. How did you feel going into writing new music and, hopefully putting some message out there? Do you resonate exactly with what Luke was feeling? Or did you maybe feel a little bit different? Did you maybe, I don't know, go the opposite route? Clearly you guys work together, but I'm just curious what you thought about that, Joel.
Well, Eddie, Luke's a father. I'm not a father, so there's some layers obviously to that he felt that I didn't. I think the pandemic has been unique for every single person. You can't put a kind of a blanket statement over anyone, because each ethnic group or each family or either vocational loss or relational loss or loss of life. And so I think it's similar. We probably interacted with it slightly differently. I think coming into the studio, and as far as synergy as to what we're writing towards and what kind of record we're making and what we feel prompted to write and create coming out of it, I think that was very similar. And that was, our responsibility as a band. I think this is not every band, this is just us, but we really feel and have from the beginning prompted to offer a sense of hope and honesty and thoughtfulness to everything we write, so that when someone listens to a song or comes to a show, they leave after listening or after seeing the show with something that will sort of hold them up. And so I feel like this record is very timely for where we find ourselves in human history, and we're excited to be offering that to people going forward for sure.
Yeah, that is one thing I wanted to ask you guys, because one thing I noticed about your music, which is brilliant writing all the time, but there's always this common theme of hope, togetherness, you can make it through, which is good music that you always no matter what. And I always get very curious of where that inspiration comes from. And if you guys don't mind me asking, both of you, maybe together or separately, I guess in the most simplest way to put it, I don't really know if this is like, a good topic or maybe we shouldn't touch this. I don't know. But in your opinions, how do you think the states of things are right now overall? Maybe not necessarily just in this country, but in the world, because I do see with artists like you who continuously focus on trying to spread good messages, trying to inspire people to be better and just, get up and do something great with their lives. I imagine that people like you are constantly observing where things are headed, what is going on. And a lot of the inspiration for your music probably comes from that. So if you don't mind me asking, maybe in just a simple way, how do you feel things are right now in the world? Do you feel like things are improving? And I don't just mean like pandemic wise. I mean, just in terms of like societies and humans.
Socially. Yeah,
exactly. If you don't mind me asking, how do you?
There's a great quote that says, and I'm sure Luke will have a lot to say about this as well, but a great quote that says, it was by an Irishman, I think. He said, "Hey, let someone else write the laws of the land. I'll write the songs of the land." And you are right when you say like, that's part of our responsibility, is to gauge the temperature of society and write towards, I believe, a hopeful future. Look, can you pose an argument that there are certain areas where humanity's heading in maybe into some dark areas? Sure. But if you look through human history, man, our ancestors were just trying to survive. Like they were just trying to put food on the table. You couldn't create music. You couldn't do podcasts. You were just out there trying to make it through.
Yeah.
So the very fact that you and I, or the three of us, are sitting on a smart device at a coffee shop in an air-conditioned bedroom, and not, we're worried about things of social questions and how do we be kinder, more loving people, and these sorts of grand questions. We're not worried about how am I going to survive the next week. Now, granted, there are still people in the world that are, and we got to do something about that. And there's a great what's that John Adams quote, Luke, that he said, I'm going to basically, create these laws and so on, so that my kids can become, attorneys or lawmakers, so that their kids can become artists and painters. And I think we're at that place. I mean, where a lot of people are able to. There's still work to be done. Hear me when I say that, like socially, racially, spiritually. But context is key. I feel like, to give us a sense of hope as to where we can go in the future.
That's fascinating. I love that you bring up that quote, because it is true. Anytime that you look at society and you see how things have progressed, the fact that we are doing this right now, like you said, the fact that we can be creative and make music and do things of that nature says a lot about what our ancestors had to go through in order to get us through here. I mean, I'm Guatemalan. I was born here in America, but my parents are from a third world country, and I know that a lot of people relate to that. You know, that generation could not have pursued, you know, creative desires if they even wanted to, because it just, you have to put food on the table, like you're saying. I just find it so fascinating that no matter where society is headed, there's always people trying to do good, because sometimes you would imagine that there would be this inclination to just, you know, I mean, let's just go with the flow kind of thing, if that makes sense. But I don't know, Luke, what do you think? What do you think of the state of the world?
Yeah, I heard a leader say in an interview actually quite a lot of years ago, and I'm not saying I agree with this, but it was an interesting statement. And the interviewer said, "Hey, do you think the world's worse off today than ever in the history of the world?" And this other leader said, "No, I just think we hear about it." And I thought that was actually a really interesting thought, in that Joel's kind of right. I mean, look, man, you had the Black Plague in the 14th and 15th century, taking out like 25% of the world's population. I mean, you compare different times, perspective is everything. But what I do know, so when it comes to saying, look at my personal outlook on being, you know, an Australian, we're also immigrants from Australia, different situation, but coming from Australia to America, sitting here in a position to even answer this question freely, to be able to actually say something that maybe governments agree with or don't agree with, and for the most part, you know, it's still going to get put up somewhere, and that's going to be allowed to be heard by the world. These are certain liberties that I think it's occasionally that we take for granted. Yeah. And you know, I heard somebody, you know, there's the famous quote of what you can live 30 days without food, 3 days without water, but not a day without hope. I kind of come to the conclusion of whether or not we're moving in, you know, what we all might think is a great direction or not as a world, what I still have to cling to is I still have to cling to hope, and I still have to be a hopeful person, or else, man, I think it gets really dark. I think it gets really difficult for me to want to get up and, you know, serve my family. You know, what type of husband am I going to be if I'm, you know, struggling without hope? What type of father am I going to be? And I think you're right, man. It's very intentional for us to write hopeful songs, because I think that probably is, for the most part, I think the way that Joel and I attempt to live life. But, you know, I don't think Joel and I are sociologists that we can go and study the entire world at once. But I am hopeful because I choose to live that way. Yeah,
that's a really good way to live in, because I constantly find someone like me, who I call myself a professional observer. I mean, I feel like that it's a very, very
I like that
title, but
I like that.
Well, the truth is, it's something I've always done as a kid. I've always just like looked around me and try to understand how things work. And one thing I want to try and bring up, I don't want to like go into places we don't want to, but because you two are very, very good musicians, you guys are very big in faith, you guys are very big in that community. A little bit about me. I grew up Pentecostalist, Christian Pentecostalist, Hispanic, from that world. And as I've grown up, you know, I got a degree in theology. And since then, I've opened up to a lot of different ideas and different things. And so I'm a little bit on my own different journey, but I always keep my identity where, you know, originally it was. And one thing I have noticed, when I don't know if you guys agree or disagree, but where I see your uniqueness is you guys are this duo who has a lot of, I wouldn't say faith-based music, but it's music of hope. And in that community, I've seen a lot of, I guess I would say, people in my area where I'm in California, Los Angeles, California. You see a lot of people sort of turning away from that community and that culture. And I feel like I can see why. But I'm curious, in your eyes and in your experience, do you feel like that's something that's happening right now, where people are no longer wanting to be associated to religion? I have noticed that people still believe in God, but there's a big trend to not associate with anything. So I'm curious if you don't mind me asking you to what you guys feel about that, because you're in it. You're in that community. You do a lot of stuff in that community, but also for other people too. I don't know. You guys might have a unique perspective, but I don't know if I'm allowed to ask. I don't know, but I want to throw it out there.
Man, I love the fact that you're an observer, by the way. I think people in life, more of us need to just just pay attention and ask more questions, you know.
Appreciate that. Thank you, man.
So first of all, Eddie, yeah, well done. You know, Luke said it before. We're two of 7 kids from Australia, sort of a very post-religious country, whose parents have loved each other for 45 years, and we homeschooled. We traveled with our sister was a kind of a Christian gospel singer. And so we've almost been in probably almost every denomination or church you could poke a stick at, particularly in the United States.
Wow.
And so we've, similarly to you, we've observed a lot ourselves over the years. And I think what we're actively observing now is people are putting their thinking cap back on, if you will, like you. They're observing again. There was a time, I feel like, particularly in this country, where people were kind of somewhat spoon-fed truth. And even talking about the Bible or scripture, I mean, scripture is like, hey, you know, there's a biblical reference, like you shouldn't be living on milk. You need to have like solid food. You need to have steak. There's another verse that talks about like, work out your faith, you know. All of this is about, it's about question, it's about asking, it's about seek, you know, seek and you will find, knock, and, you know, all of these, we sort of lost that for a minute. And I do think in a pandemic, in you know, a time where everyone's asking questions about everything, that we all owe it to ourselves to put, if God is God, and if Jesus is who he said he was and is, then surely he's powerful enough to withstand some questions we might have. And so what we're seeing, I think, is a lot of people, they kind of say deconstructing, but like deconstructing and reconstructing,
yeah,
based on all of these questions that we have. And man, maybe we're the cup half full guys over here. But I think it's an important part of any journey of wholeness and completion to put on the table some questions. I think the thing that we've got to be really careful of is to not be too isolated, to not ask questions in silos. Because man, if you want to find the answers that you're looking for on Google, you can find every one of them. You can also find the exact opposite answer, and you can find all the proofs to that as well, you know. Yeah.
And get diagnosed with cancer too, with everything.
You can diagnose yourself
every day
because of some symptom. But we have to ask these questions in community. I think that's where, and be safe to ask questions and not feel like we're going to get our head bit off at every turn. And that if we have work to do, and it's interesting, we're releasing this song called Relate, and the whole principle of the song is like, you know, what if we're all the same in different kinds of ways? And the whole question of the song is, can you relate to me if I think or act or look or different from you? Can you still relate? And so it's a topic that I think we want to keep exploring. We're not experts, but I think it's a good question to ask for sure.
Yeah. I'm going to ask Luke for your thoughts too, but I wanted to just say this briefly because I appreciate that you're open to that. I appreciate the compliments, by the way. I think it's always important to appreciate a good compliment. But it's interesting because in my experience, what you said, 100% I agree with, because regardless of whatever I identify myself with, I have great conversations with so many great artists that I feel very blessed to be able to do. And so many of them are at a place where they believe in higher power. They believe in some sort of organized universe, but it's like you were saying, there's a lot of people who've been asking the questions and there are no answers, at least in the way that we were looking for them. And what you mentioned that I do think is very important is that communal asking of questions. I find that, at least where I grew up, me being Hispanic, it's a very strict environment when you grow up like a Hispanic Christian person. Yeah.
By the way, my wife is like, she's fully Hispanic, California, Mexico, nice. Texas. So we've got that to relate to. Speaking of,
beautiful. What's your wife's name? Let me ask.
Mariah with an O.
Mariah. Yeah. Shout out to you, Mariah. I love it. So she can relate. So the interesting part of it is that I do agree that there is this environment, in at least maybe the old ways, maybe not so much now, where asking those questions is heavily discouraged. You can see that a lot in history. You can see that when the printing press was invented way back, way back. I guess my question then there is, do you see that community is changing? Do you feel like it is a lot more open where people are willing to have that question? Or is that currently the struggle that we're in being able to build those communities where we can ask those questions in a healthy way and have a discourse?
Well, I think part of what you're talking about is the lack of, when you talk about people kind of deconstructing their faith in college, that college age thing, or just turning away from the church, is because sadly, I think a lot of it came off as non-authentic to people. When you see, I mean, Eddie, you tell me, if you see someone who you go, man, that guy is a humble, authentic follower of Jesus, usually you walk away going, man, that guy's amazing. Usually where it all starts to fall apart is where you go, that person says that, but I saw what he did over the weekend, or I saw how he treated his wife, or I saw how he treated his kids. That's when we start going, okay, and so obviously the Bible, it says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. Well, I think the question that we all need to be asking ourselves, are we loving other people well, even if they are asking those questions? Are we actually, or are we saying, man, you got to go now? Like, oh, you asked this? Oh, man, you have no place here. Well, I don't think that's how Jesus would respond to things. I think if you were to have this same conversation with Jesus, I think you'd be like, man, Eddie, I love having this chat with you, man. This is awesome. I love you. You know what I'm saying? So I think in some cases for us, I think that's the challenge is can we be people even in the tension and the struggle of disagreements and different things? But man, how are we loving? How am I loving my wife? How am I doing as a father? How am I doing with people that are different from me or disagree with me? Because I can tell you what, and the other thing is I was going to say this, in the Bible, Jesus spoke mostly through parables, and they were head scratching parables, right? So in that case, asking an awful lot of questions, and obviously in that case, in that situation, telling those stories so that you would get to a greater point. Well, I think that there's something to that. If it was good enough for Jesus, maybe it's good enough for us to try as well.
Yeah. I love that you guys are very comfortable with that, because not everybody is. And I understand why, because I think that there is this deep rooted fear, and I don't know where it came from. I'm not going to pretend like I know, but for example, and I hate to bring up my experiences, but I feel like it's a good way to relate. It's, in my experience, when I studied this in school, I remember that there was this huge pushback. I was very young when I studied this, but I was always that guy who, no matter what was being asked, I would always see different angles to it. And I would see like, oh, what about this?
You're an observer.
That? Yeah. And the interesting part is there's always this instant, like, you can't ask that question. You just don't go there. Maybe it was because the teachers just don't know the answer, but maybe I think there is this respect, like you were saying, Luke, there is this respect when you see somebody that is so comfortable in being able to be like, yeah, look, this is what I believe. What do you believe in? Let's have a conversation. I may not agree at the end of the day, but you know what? You're still human. I'm still human. I'm going to love you just the same. I guess my question is, do you guys ever wonder where that negativity may come from? Because it doesn't seem like you guys have that. So it's fascinating to me that where that came from. Is it your life? Is it your parents? I don't know. Could be a lot of things. But does that make sense? It may be. There may not be no answer.
I think it's a great question, Eddie. It's funny. The business that we work in, right? Everything's about tension and music, right? I mean, think about it. Yeah. Like tension on vocal cords, and Luke's just walked through this with having to have a vocal procedure. It's tension on the guitar strings. Pianos have enormous amount of tension in each of those strings. But when the tension is set right, it creates harmony and beauty. And when the tension is wrong, it creates tension and discord. And I think it's the same thing actually in life. When you stay in the tension, I'd call it the tension of the spirit, right? The tension of like, I am not God, but I do trust that there's beauty and there's creative design and there's purpose and there's redemption. And I believe Jesus was who he said he was. And this is this guy's just such a loving Jesus. You read about Jesus, this guy's such a loving man. You look at this and you go, what he stayed in the tension. He was always but it was harmonious. I think the people that when the tension gets out of whack, we can tend to snap into fear. We snap into judgment. We snap into absolutes. We snap into my way or your way. I mean, we've just seen it last year, not maybe on a religious level, but on a social level, on a political level. It's fear. So the struggle for us all is, how do we stay in this tension, but stay in it in a way that it creates harmony and beauty and the fruit of the Spirit, love and joy and peace and patience and kindness, all the things we heard about when we were kids. But to your question, I think there's that razor thin line between that beautiful harmony that Luke was referring to seeing in people. And then if you just take it a few degrees off, you get into this other uncomfortable thing. And that's where I think people, myself included, if we're not in this rhythm, we can tend to deal in absolutes and tend to deal in fear, tend to deal in judgment. And I wasn't part of your educational system, and I'm sure there's always more to the story. But if I had to guess, I would say, people had fallen into that, which we're all prone to do, into that tension and that discord that creates fear.
Yeah.
And so, thank you, Chico. And so, I think that's the challenge for us all. I think we're finding it too with what does it look like to be still? What does it look? COVID taught us this. What does it look to? We in America, we love the West. We love to accomplish. What does it look like to slow down? What does it look like to not accomplish for maybe one day a week? Or these are things that we're taught in by Jesus and throughout Scripture. But then you look at it with all of our science and understanding today, and you go, and what if, scientifically, it's best to take one day off in 7? What if scientifically it's best to pray to God for healing and hope for other people? What does that do to your mindset and the atoms in your body? How does it change your neuro pathways? These were all things that people just had faith with 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 years ago. Now we're having science come in and say, bro, these are some of the best ways to live. And I love that, man. I love, speaking of being curious, speaking of being an observer, I love that I believe the faith and spirituality and science are making this great reconvergence where you're looking at it going, man, this is just not black and white, rules on a page, but these were actually great principles to live the best, freest version of what you could live as a human being,
Yeah.
And that's what we're really getting towards, that's the whole point of this whole thing, is how do we become free,
Yeah. That is so beautiful.
It's a soapbox.
It's so beautiful. I'm so happy to hear you say that, because I can sense between you two and me, it doesn't matter what I believe. I can sense that no matter what, just in this small conversation, you guys are not only listening to what I'm saying, but you love me just for who I am. And I think that's such a beautiful thing to obtain. And one thing I have observed, and I don't know if this has happened to you too, I'm hoping that it hasn't, but I'm curious if it's okay if I ask. I know that sometimes when people like you who are, they have a great foundation in faith, and whether it's Christianity or any other religion, and then they tend to be a little bit more open to other ideas, like you were just saying, Joel, like a marrying of science and faith. There are a lot of traditionalists in my world, in my culture, who hate that. They despise that, and they will fight that tooth and nail. And anyone who comes forward with even just a little idea, I'll give you a great example. I don't know. I don't imagine you're aware of this guy, but this guy's name is Dante. Forget his last name, but he's Hispanic, and he was a humongous evangelist when I was a kid. Very Bible thumping, cutthroat kind of person. And at some point in his adult life, he starts talking about the stuff that we're talking about. And he has kind of this revelation. And now he's a very prolific figure in the Latin American world, where he works in entertainment. He has a late night show, but he has a humongous church, and he's very open. And a lot of Hispanic celebrities love hanging out with this guy because he's very honest. He's very loving. He's very open about his faith. And a lot of traditional Hispanic churches hate him, despise him.
Yeah.
They think he's ruining the culture. Do you two ever feel like some people feel like that towards you two at all? Maybe not. I don't know. I'm not sure if that's okay to ask.
It's the beauty of being a musician, man.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that for the most part, I think, Taylor Swift says hate is going to hate. Like you're going to get some, right? You're always going to get some of that. But, not to keep going back to scripture, but hey, look at the people that were in the in crowd when Jesus came along. He was the one who they're the ones who basically killed him, So you got to realize that, he was a man that he changed the trajectory of it's the most read book in the world. It's there's so much about the way that he lived that was counterculture. And sometimes you're going to get people that it's what Joel said. You're going to get people that are fearful. If you counter anything, if you're living a life that rubs people a little bit the wrong way, you may get some pushback. But hey, at the end of the day, they're not the ones that I'm living my life for. And if we're going to, I think in music, podcasting is probably the same, right?
Oh yeah.
If you ruffle the feathers of somebody and then all of a sudden you want to probably just always have the praise of everyone, that's when you lose everyone. You can't make everybody happy, and you're not going to be able to please everybody. And these are, it's an interesting example that you gave, and you're right. Some people get afraid of the what ifs, and in some cases, I think even if you're a traditionalist, and occasionally you were to wrestle with some of these what ifs. What if you were actually brought into greater intimacy with the things that you believe? What if you were in greater intimacy with Jesus because you questioned, was it actually this way? Was it that way? And that's why you have to trust that that absolute truth really is absolute truth. Because if it's not, then you have to ask those questions. You may end up on some rabbit trail, right? But if you end up back at the truth, isn't that freeing? Isn't that beautiful? Isn't that like, oh, wow, I'd always thought it was this way, but it's similar to that, but it actually I've been revealed some things on the journey. Isn't that kind of the story of life? Isn't that kind of the reason why we're given a journey? When you get to the mountaintop, there's not always just one way to get there. Yeah. And occasionally you got to go through some bumps, you got to go through some valleys, and you got to get a little scrappy to get up the mountainside because you took a wrong turn. But ultimately, if you get back up to the mountaintop, that's what you're hoping for, right?
Yeah. What a great answer. That's a very, very beautiful answer. I love talking to you two. You guys are so open about this stuff. I think it's beautiful. I think it's great. I love that you guys, it reflects on your personality, it reflects on your music. I really appreciate the openness, the honesty, because that's what makes great conversations. It's very easy to just, I'm not trying to, talk bad things about other people, but, there's so much content about, tell me about your album, tell me about your song. What does this mean? But I think it's very important to get into these conversations, even if it's just surface level, because I think it plants seeds for people to be able to become better. And at the end of the day, what matters to me is for people to take a second look at who they are, regardless of where they land, regardless of whether they agree with us or not. If they can become a better person by hearing an honest conversation, then I've done my job. And that's really what matters behind this. And half the job is yours.
It's them becoming curious, I think, Eddie, is what you're getting at. And that's what I liked about this is not a common conversation for us to have, and I love that. But you create an environment of curiosity and of asking questions and being free to explore. I think that's key, not only in this format as a podcast, but it's also key in life. The more that we can, what if I'm wrong about a whole bunch of things? I know I am. What if someone that I think has the least amount of information or insight actually has something profound? But yet we're so bent on, no, I'm going to keep the information out. It's I think there's a beauty in the question. And going back to, speaking of scriptural reference, going back to what Luke said about parables. Jesus was the guy that was he wasn't a spoon feeder. He was hey, he went to his 12 dudes and was hey, don't tell them what I mean by this. I'll tell you, but don't tell them, because they got to work this thing out for themselves. They got to ask the questions. I mean, if our main man's doing that, being like keeping the tension and the question and the gap, I think it's only fair that you in your life and as you produce these podcasts, that you do the same thing. Just leave that, invite the question, and let people explore it with you. I just think that's just so fun. So well done.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And like I was saying, I can only do half the job. It matters that the other people are able to reciprocate and be honest. And so I appreciate you two being open and comfortable enough to talk about it. It's been an absolute pleasure. I know we're almost hitting that hour mark, so I want to respect your time and I want to make sure that you guys have enough time to do your thing. As we start to wrap up, I want to hear about your music. I want to hear about some of the new stuff you guys have coming out. It sounds super exciting. You guys have done amazing things in the past. Take a moment. Let me know. Any performances, albums, releases? Give me all of it. What do you got? Can you hear me?
What do we got, Luke?
Yes.
What do we got?
Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
I thought Joel was going to take it. Yeah, man. So this is actually interesting because it's the first time we've made a record while we've actually been home, for the most part, exclusively going back to what we started with at the top. And so we took it like a job, like a 9-to-5 job. We went into the studio most days at 9, 10, 11 o'clock, and we worked, till kind of dinner time, came back by dinner. And so it's produced some, it's always so funny when people ask, like, well, tell me about the new project. Like, look, we've put our best foot forward. We've done everything that we can. But artists that say, man, this is groundbreaking stuff that we've worked on, this is going to be the best album we've ever made. Well, it's not really for me to say, because that's what you do.
Know. Yeah.
No, there's no way you can know. I've worked on this stuff. I'm compromised at this point. So look, we're thrilled about it. We got a song called Relate coming out August 6th, which will be the first song from the new project, which is currently nameless. So we got to work on that. We got some, television stuff coming out, and the album will come out next year, but we're going to try and release kind of new material from that album every 6 weeks, 8 weeks, to kind of build up to that. And so it's a really exciting time for us. It's great to be able to be out with the people a little bit again, just to see people's faces, similar to some of the things that we've talked about, to see on somebody's face, what a song means to them, and the smile that they may have, or you have a song that for whatever reason has changed their life, or whatever it might be. To see that expression on their face, to see how the way that they sing to it is thrilling. So to be able to do that, we're doing a Christmas album. We're doing a Christmas tour this Christmas. Obviously, supporting a Christmas album that came out last year. And so we have a lot to be thankful for. At the end of the day, it's a privilege to be able to do music. It's a privilege to be able to write. It's a privilege that people want to listen. And even the fact that you would want to talk to us today is pretty humbling, because. It is a strange time in the world, but a wonderful time to create. And I hope that what we've created is something that, once again, like what we were talking about earlier, it spurs people on. It gives people a little bit of hope, and it makes people feel less lonely.
Amazing. What a great way to end that. Guys, thank you so much. Joel, Luke, you guys are awesome. Thank you for spending an hour with me. It's been an absolute pleasure picking your brain for a little bit. I can't thank you enough. It's such a huge honor.
Absolutely, Eddie. And do you ever have those moments where you're like, wait, did we just record this thing? You're like, oh no.
All the time. It's like, oh shoot.